something that Abraham Lincoln signed, and it did free the slaves. Well, what actually was it? So this is what I told him. The Emancipation Proclamation was a document issued and signed by former President Abraham Lincoln that not only freed the slaves, but gave us a source of independence and power.
Yeah.
Our most precious prayer had been answered. Now, I will admit, I have never in my life read the Emancipation Proclamation ever before. To be honest, my first time actually reading it was only a couple days ago. I was surprised that I learned as much as I did, and it was an awful lot. One of the things I learned that it was the actual idea of the Emancipation Proclamation was thought up way before it was even written on paper. The actual idea was thought up and issued on September 22nd, 1862, and wasn't actually written down and signed until January 1st, 1863. It stated that as of January 1st, 1863, all slaves in the states of Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, and Virginia were to be declared free and counted as equal. Even though this really didn't end slavery across the United States altogether, it was still considered to be a huge blessing sent from God to these slaves as a sign that their suffering was over and that they were finally going to get the respect due to them. It made the average slave think, wow, I'm not a slave anymore.
Wow.
I don't have to work for this guy or talk to this person in a certain way. I can go find my family and live my own life. I have no more masters. I'm free. I'm through here. I'm my own boss. The Emancipation Proclamation had such an impact on these slaves' lives that it even allowed black males to go and join the Union Army and naval forces. By the end of the Civil War, almost 200,000 black soldiers and sailors had fought for the Union and their freedom. By then, word of the slaves' freedom had spread so fast, you would have thought that this was the biggest thing happening since the Civil War. However, while some slaves were enjoying the fact that they were finally free, most of them were scared, thinking, okay, I'm free, and I don't have to work for these people anymore. But where will I go? I don't have any land, no credit, no form of ID, and very little education, so I can't really do anything. Those people ended up going back to their so-called masters and to sharecrop for them. Me personally, I think that President Lincoln took a humongous risk even thinking this up. With him being from Virginia, a current Confederate state and a slave state, he could have easily been killed for his actions. I guess that's why so many Southerners turned their back on him. When I think about it, if Abraham Lincoln had not did what he did, my generation would probably be in Haylock right now. I probably wouldn't be standing here talking to you today. We'd all probably be out scattered somewhere in the field somewhere, plowing fields and seeing spiritual, hoping that one day we wouldn't have to do it anymore. It's all because of people like Abraham Lincoln and Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Mr. Monroe Woods, and Miss Bethany Miller that we're all still here doing some of the things we do now. Even our President Barack Obama has something to do with this. We owe them our lives. From now on, I will forever cherish the day that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of the state, the people whereof shall be in the rebellion against the United States, shall then, thenceforth, and forever be free.
Good morning. First, giving honor to God, who is my life. My task here today is to tell you all about the March on Washington. Everyone has heard about the speech of Dr. Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, but everyone failed to know where it really started. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was one of the largest political rallies for human rights in United States history and called the civil and economic rights for African Americans. It took place in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, August 28, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr., standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, delivered his historic I Have a Dream speech, advocating racial harmony during the march. The march was planned and started by A. Philip Randolph, the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, president of the Negro American Labor Council, and vice president of the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. Randolph had planned a similar march in 1941. The threat of the earlier march had convinced President Roosevelt to establish the Committee for Fair Employment Practice and ban discriminatory hiring in the defense industry. But the 1963 March was an important part of the rapidly expanding civil rights movement. It also marked the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. The March on Washington was a part of how the civil rights leaders expected to get their voices to be heard. Many were tired of not being heard by their government and decided to do something about it. As blacks faced continued discrimination in the post-war years, the March on Washington group met annually to repeat blacks' demands for economic equality. The civil rights movement of the 1960s transformed the political climate, and in 1963, black leaders began to plan a new March on Washington designed specifically to advocate passage of the Civil Rights Act and stall in progress. The 1960s were noted to be the racial unrest and civil rights demonstrations. The 1963 March on Washington attracted an estimate of 250,000 people for different ethnic groups and organizations came together and flooded the streets for a peaceful demonstration to promote civil rights and economic equality for African Americans. On August the 28th, the marchers arrived. By 11 o'clock in the morning, more than 200,000 had gathered by the Washington Monument, where the march had to begin. It was a diverse crowd, black and white, rich and poor, young and old, Hollywood stars, and everyday people. Despite the fears had prompt extraordinary precautions. Those assembled marched peacefully. Participants walked down Constitution and Independent Avenues, then gathered before the Lincoln Monument for the famous I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King gives his speech for freedom. He begins his speech with the emancipation of slaves, and later mentions that after being freed from slavery, blacks are still not free. King claims all men were issued a check and promise of freedom. Yet for black men and women, that check came with insignificant funds. The members of the Civil Rights Union issued a check to America. They returned America's upkept promise with one they are sure to keep. They continue pursuit of justice. However, King hopes to obtain equality through nonviolent movement. He tells fellow black people to not have hatred or bitterness in their heart, not to turn to guns and fists. He knows that violence to obtain peace only leads to an endless cycle of fighting, unnecessary death, and cruelty. Also, King believes blacks must not let one incident lead them to hate all people of different races and nationalities. He knows that only leads to the same kind of discrimination he is fighting against in his speech. Black people are not fighting for their own satisfaction, to fight until they feel content with what they do and what it has to be accomplished. Black people are fighting for continuous freedom and equality, not just to be stopped by King's 1963 speech, where the private organization of the march highlighted the tension over strategies in and beyond the movement. The march itself was a tremendous success. The March on Washington and Dr. Martin Luther King's speech was the visible symbol of the strength of the rights movement. Then the question has been asked, what impact has the march had on others in their lives? Well, just here in Hardeman County, I have asked a few elder people who might have experienced the chaos taking place in 1963. At this time, I asked, how do you feel? How has it impacted and influenced you and your community? The replies I received was the March on Washington has helped black people get jobs and be treated equal. Also, that the March on Washington set a stage for a better future and help the blacks live a better life, where they get treated the same as other races. Just by sharing this information with you today, as a teenager growing up and learning how my elders had to go through in the past, it is a blessing to be free. So on this day, we should just sit back and think where we could be if no one never set foot on the street and marched for our freedom. All right.